welcome back to my channel. Welcome to the first video of 2025. In this video, I'm going to be talking about 25 books that I want to read in 2025, aka my 2025 TBR. This video is going to be broken down into 3 different parts. The first one being new releases that I'm excited for this year. The second one being books that are already released but I really want to get to in 2025. And then the last category is going to be rereads that I want to get to in 2025. Disclaimer though, I picked 25 books for this list of new releases and books that I want to get to, and I came up with 25 books easily. And I totally forgot that there are rereads that I also want to get to this year. So the rereads will just be a bonus to the 25 books, but I do have like 25 books in the official TBR. Also, another disclaimer, I don't actually have any of the books that I want to read this year in physical format. Like, it's not part of a physical TBR or anything. I don't actually have an extensive physical TBR. The books in this list are just books that I really want to read, and I know that I'll get to the books on my physical TBR anyways because I have them there and I see them every day, so it's kind of always in the back of my mind. But these books on this list are books that I actually actively have to seek out, so these are books that I'm just keeping on my radar for reading this upcoming year. I also don't actually know the description of all of the books that I want to read. It's just new releases that I am highly anticipating, and then books that I've heard such good things about that I've been wanting to read. But to avoid this video being super duper long, I'm just going to give a very brief description of what the book synopsis is. Why do I feel like my voice is so scratchy right now? Anyway, I'm going to be giving a general description of what the books are because I don't actually know what they're about. I am going to be referencing notes on my laptop and like things I could find on the book so I can give a better explanation of what the synopsis is. But anyway, starting off with new releases that I am excited about for this year. I have them written down in order of the anticipated release date. Starting off with the first book that I'm super excited for, which is A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. I read my first Adrienne Young book, which was The Unmaking of June Farrow, a couple months ago in November of last year, and I absolutely loved it. I love her writing style. I love how the magical realism is set up. The premise of it sounds a little bit less interesting to me than The Unmaking of June Farrow did, but I'm still intrigued to read it. It does come out on January 7th. So this is a magical realism mystery thriller type of book with a subplot of romance, of course. The main character, James, had a twin brother, and she is investigating his death because he died of mysterious ways. Mentions in the synopsis she encounters a man named Micah who was the one love of her life, or the only man she ever loved, so I believe that's where the subplot of romance comes in. And then I think the magical realism part of it is probably the mysterious death, and also the fact it listed in the synopsis that she has always felt a strange connection to her twin brother. Like, she would feel his emotions and things, and she felt that he died before she ever found out the news that he had passed away. So I think that's where the magic comes in. The next book on my list is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I don't think this needs any sort of description or explanation of what this book is about. Rebecca Yarros is the author of a lot of romance books, but I think she's most well known for the Fourth Wing series, or the Empyrean series. She wrote Fourth Wing and then Iron Flame, which are both books that kind of blew up on the internet, I want to say 2 years ago. Yeah, I think it was about 2 years ago that these two books blew up on the internet. And Onyx Storm is the third book in the Empyrean series. It comes out on January 21st. This is the third book in the series, so I can't really explain a lot of what happened, but the second book does end off on a cliffhanger, as a lot of romantasy books often do in a series. I am not that invested in the story and the characters. Like, I don't love this series as much as other people do, but I have a connection to it because my best friend and I read Fourth Wing together. We were kind of obsessed with it at the time, and then we read Iron Flame together when it came out last year. So I think we'll probably do the same for Onyx Storm when it comes out. So that's kind of mostly why I'm excited about it, but I am interested to learn where the cliffhanger goes because I've seen a lot of theories of things that are going to happen in book 3. The next book on my list is Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, which comes out on February 4th. I've read almost every Ali Hazelwood book that's come out except for one of the books in her STEM romances. I can't remember which one, and I haven't read her like novellas, but every other book I've read, and I enjoy them. They never really rate higher than 4 stars for me. It usually ranges around a 3 or so. It is a nice palette cleanser between books. The only issue I have with her books is that, with the exception to Not in Love, which is her most recent release, all her FF FMCs have a very similar vibe. They're kind of quirky and they're small and they're a little bit inexperienced, and the male main character is always super tall and big and muscular and, you know, the works. So I do find a bit of her books a little bit like icky feeling, like I cringe out a lot when I read Ali Hazel books, but at the same time it's just so fun. This is Ali Hazelwood's first sports romance, if I'm not mistaken. Both main characters are swimmers and they're training to be in the Olympics. From what I gathered from the synopsis, it seems like it's a fake dating trope or like a friends with benefits situation and then it turns into something more. I am excited for that. I don't think it's going to be like a 5-star, my favorite read or anything at all, but it's always a fun, good time. The next book on the list is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, and this comes out on March 18th. I am so excited for this book. This is the 5th book that Suzanne Collins has released in the Hunger Games world. This book follows the 50th annual Hunger Games, and because of that, in honor of the Court of Quell, the Capitol has decided to pull 4 names from each district versus the 2 that they usually do. This is actually Hamich's story, and it takes place before the original Hunger Games trilogy. I think it is going to be a very genius commentary on the current state of the world, and I'm interested in how she is going to frame it to be like digestible to readers but to fit into the story overall. And as much as I'm interested in Hamich's story, I think the social political commentary side of things is what I am more intrigued by, and obviously my 12-year-old self is also just like fangirling and super excited that there's another Hunger Games book. Next on my list is Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, which comes out on April 1st. Abby Jimenez has quickly become a favorite author of mine. I only started reading her books this year, and I really loved how each of the characters had like an emotional backstory and background. It wasn't just solely focused on the romance. What I love about Abby Jimenez's books is she does mental health representation so well. I feel like she really understands what she's talking about and what she's trying to represent, and the way it's integrated into the story, into the third act breakup, feels like it flows very well and very real in comparison to some other authors I've noticed who've tried to incorporate mental health representation, which I really appreciate that authors are doing that now. It just feels very surface level, and it feels like they're just adding it in for the sake of it, almost like when you're reading a book and you just notice that it's trope after trope after trope. It's like now mental health representation has become a trope, but I feel like Abby Jimenez doesn't do that, and she actually does it very well. Say You'll Remember Me, it's a book that follows Samantha, who was briefly introduced in Just for the Summer. She was like a very minor character in one scene. So she has a lot going on in her family, and she goes on a date with Xavier, who is the male main character. He's a veterinarian, and they really had a great time on their date. But because of her family dynamics and her situation, everything that's going on, she decides to tell him that like things aren't going to work out, to kind of just forget about her, remember that this was an amazing date, but that's all. But I think what happens is like obviously they can't forget about each other because they had a connection during their date, and it probably progresses from there. The next book on my list is probably my most anticipated book of the entire year, and it is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, which comes out on April 22nd. This is my most anticipated book of the year. I don't even know what it's about, but it's Emily Henry, so I know I'm going to really enjoy it. As you can probably tell, I am an Emily Henry fan. Emily Henry's first few adult romance books, so Beach Read, People Who Meet on Vacation, and Book Lovers, I enjoyed them thoroughly, but Happy Place, which is released in 2023, was like leagues above the other 3 for me. And then Funny Story came out, and like I didn't think Happy Place could be topped, but I think Funny Story and Happy Place are kind of tied in my mind. And now she's releasing another book, and I feel like her books are just gonna get better and better, so I'm so excited to read this book. From what I remember seeing, it's like a rivals to lovers situation. Both the main characters, I think the female main character's name is Alice. Alice and the male main character, they're both authors, and they both got picked for a 1-month trial to try and write this woman's autobiography. And for Alice, this is like her big break into the writing world, if I'm not mistaken, but the male main character is already an established author, so I think it's going to be an interesting situation. It's like rivals to lovers. There's a little bit of forced proximity because they're secluded on this little island that the woman lives to try to write this biography for her. Emily Henry always throws in some like family dynamic issues and things as well. There's a lot of like subtle mental health representation bits in there. So yeah, I I'm so excited for another Emily Henry book. Next on my list is The Knight and the Moth by Rachel Gillick. Rachel Gillick wrote the Shepherd King duology, which is One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns. One Dark Window is one of my favorite books of 2023, and then this book got released in 2023 as well, and I really enjoyed this duology. So when I saw that Rachel Gillick started posting TikToks about how she was coming out with a new book, I was so excited. I don't even know what it's about, but quickly looking up what this book is about. Sybil Delling has spent 9 years dreaming of having no dreams at all. Like the other foundling girls who traded a decade of service for a home in the great cathedral, Sybil is a diviner. In her dreams, she receives visions from 6 unearthly figures known as omens. From them, she can predict terrible things before they occur, and lords and common folk alike travel across the kingdom of Trom's windswept moors to learn their futures by her dreams. Just as she and her sister diviners near the end of their service, a mysterious knight arrives at the cathedral. Rude, heretical, and devilishly handsome, the knight Roderick has no respect for Sybil's visions. But when Sybil's fellow diviners begin to vanish one by one, she has no choice but to seek his help in finding them. For the world outside the cathedral's cloister is fraught with peril. Only the gods are the answer she is seeking. Inasmuch as she'd rather avoid Roderick's dark eyes and sharp tongue, only a heretic can defeat a god. So another gothic romantasy. There's a common theme with the female main character and male main character relationships in One Dark Window and this series that's coming up. So I'm so excited. I love Rachel Gillick's writing, and I can only imagine that this book is going to be even better than Shepherd King duologies. So overall, I'm very excited to read another Rachel Gillick book. Last 2 releases that I'm excited to read this year are It's a Love Story by Annabelle Monaghan, or Monaghan? I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but this comes out on May 27th. I don't really know what this book is about either. I've only ever read Summer Romance. I did really enjoy Summer Romance. It wasn't like my favorite romance ever, but I did feel a lot of feelings while reading it. The only thing that like irked me about it was some cringy kind of romance moments. I really enjoyed the writing, and I loved how the main character was older. Although I'm in my early 20s, it just feels like really nice to read about someone who is older in life. You feel like when you're at that age, you'll be settled and whatnot, but it's nice to read about characters who are not settled yet and still have their life to figure out. This book is about a female character named Jane. She's a creative executive at Clearwater Studios, and I think she's trying to get her first project greenlit. So she tells a little white lie to a cinematographer. She's trying to get her project greenlit. The male main character is the cinematographer that is possibly working on her project with her. I'm not entirely sure by this description. It seems a little bit confusing who the love interest is, but I'm intrigued by it. And then my last anticipated release for this year is Calabasas by R.F. Kuang. This is her first step into a fully romance novel. It is still historical fantasy, but it is going to be a bigger focus on the romance aspect of it. There's not much to go off of it online. All it says on Goodreads is Calabasas, noun, ancient Greek, the story of a hero's descent to the underworld. 2 academic rivals from Cambridge must travel to hell to rescue the soul of their advisor. Getting there is easy, surviving it and each other is another thing entirely. It's dark academia, academic rivals to lovers. They're trying to save their advisor by rescuing him from the pits of the underworld. They have to spend time together, and it's probably going to be great. I love R.F. Kuang's writing. I read a lot of R.F. Kuang books this year. I read Babel, Yellowface, and the first book in the Poppy War trilogy. Do plan on finishing the Poppy War trilogy, so I'm excited for this release to come out. It comes out on August 28th. That wraps up the new releases that I'm excited for. Now on to the books that have already been released that I just want to include on my TBR because I really want to read it this year. There are a lot, and I do not really know much about any of these books besides the fact that I've heard like raving reviews. Probably no bad reviews for any of these books. The first two I'm going to say collectively because they're by the same author, but I really want to read The Sword of Kaigan and Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. I've heard nothing but good reviews about both of these books this year. I think both of them have blown up on the internet over like this past year, but more so the past few months. I feel like more people have been picking it up and saying how amazing it is. I genuinely do not have any idea what any of these two books are about, but I've heard they are heart-wrenching. That's like pretty much all I know about them. Emma Wong writes high fantasy books, and I think they have a subplot of romance if I'm not mistaken. If there's not, I don't really care. I don't mind reading fantasy books without romance in them. If anything, I think I would prefer to read high fantasy books more so than romantasy nowadays. Over the past few months, I feel like I've been trying to read romantasies and nothing's been hitting. And I think I've run out of books that are half romance, half fantasy. I think I prefer high fantasy books with like subplots of romance. Just because the formula of romantasy books have been the same in recent releases, so nothing feels fresh. Everything feels a little bit cringe to me, so hopefully I will enjoy these books. But they're both standalone novels. They're not part of the same series or anything. I know The Sword of Kaigen has something to do with like mother-son relationships, and they're dealing with that together, I think. And then for Blood Over Bright Haven, it says a standalone dark academia brimming with mystery, tragedy, and the damning echoes of the past for fans of Leigh Bardugo, V. Schwab, and Full Metal Alchemist. I love Leigh Bardugo, I love V. Schwab, so this is kind of right up my alley. The next two on my list are two series that I would love to get to. The first one being the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. Basically, shorthand on what Jade City is about. It says Jade City is a gripping Godfather-esque saga of intergenerational blood feuds, vicious politics, magic, and kung fu. So it sounds very exciting. I'm very intrigued by this series, and it's been on my reading list for like 2 to 3 years now, I think. So it's definitely time to pick it up, and no time like a new year to start a new series. The next series that I really want to get to this year is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. The series recently blew up again because she republished like with new covers. Basically, it's like girl main character, part of a rebellion, but she's undercover at the military school. Elias is going to be like the enforcer of the Empire's law, but he really doesn't want to be. It's considered a romantasy, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm hoping that the world building and like the fantasy elements of it is a little bit stronger than the romance, or else I might get a little icked out and not want to read it. But I am excited about this series overall. The next two books on my list are also the start of another series. On my TBR for this year is The Will of the Many by James Islington, or Islington, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. But I've heard so many good things about this book. Like, I don't think I've heard a single person say a single bad thing about this book. This is a high fantasy sci-fi book based on a magic system where humans, individuals, can give their will to other people, and that is what feeds the power system. I've heard this book being described as like a magical pyramid scheme. From my understanding of the Goodreads synopsis, it says that the main character, Vis, was an orphan, and he has been contracted or like taken in to be sent to the academy to find answers, to solve a murder, to search for an ancient weapon, to uncover secrets and may tear the Republic apart. So someone has recruited him to like help them with their efforts, I guess. Break down the hierarchy, I assume. So I'm super excited to read more high fantasy this year. On that note, next on my TBR is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first book in the Bloodsworn saga. I think it's a 4-book series. This is also a high fantasy book. It involves dragons and gods, and I don't really know what else it involves, but I've heard very good things about it. It is a Norse-inspired world packed with myth, magic, and bloody vengeance. I guess there's like individuals who are bloodsworn, and they're trying to seek vengeance against the gods or something like that. Also, the lighting has been getting darker and darker and more gloomy as I film this video, so I don't know if the lighting is still good, but hopefully it is bright enough to not be like weird lighting. Next on my list is a book I actually do own, and that is Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I bought this book because I love the cover. I think it is so beautiful. I really wanted the Kickstarter edition. I think the Kickstarter edition of Trust is so beautiful. But anyway, I got this book and I really wanted to read it. I've heard that you can appreciate this book a lot more when you've read a bit more books in the Cosmere because it references some things in the Cosmere. I'll probably just try to read Mistborn 1 and then maybe Mistborn 2 or something, and then read Trust. That's kind of my plan. But this book is about a girl who's trapped on an island, I think, and then like the love of her life gets sent somewhere else, and it's basically about her journey to like go rescue him. And I think the whole book takes place on a boat, and there's like a very unique magic system with spores. That's the extent of my knowledge of this book. I'm super excited to get to this eventually. Next on my list is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I've only ever read one other V.E. Schwab book, which was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. It was one of my favorite books of 2023. I still think about it to this day, and I definitely want to reread it eventually. And I've heard a lot of good things about Vicious. I've heard that it's like people's favorite V.E. Schwab book, so I'm interested to see how I like it in comparison to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, because it is completely different. Vicious is like an anti-hero type of book where two college kids, they figure out that if you have a near-death experience, you can gain powers from that. And I think they're a bit morally gray. They do experiments, they try to gain powers, and like they end up in jail, and like something happens. It sounds very intriguing to me. I'm trying to get my partner into reading. This is going to be the book that we buddy read together so that we can kind of like keep each other updated. So it's going to be a book that I read over a long span of time because we're just gonna read it chapter by chapter with each other. And so this book holds a special place in my mind just because my partner and I are doing the buddy read. Next on my list is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. I've heard so many amazing things about this book, and I've been wanting to read it for I think the past 2 years now. I think it's been on like the back of my mind. I've been trying to get a physical copy of it off of Book Outlet for like the past 4 times I've bought Book Outlet books, but it's always sold out, probably for good reason. And I've heard that you should go into it blind, so I'm not going to look up what it's about. I've just heard it's very like, not creepy, I've heard it's like absurd, but in a good way. So I'm excited to read it eventually. Next on my list is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. I don't think I need to explain who this author is. He is a very well-loved author in the like booktube, book talk community. He wrote the Fairtime trilogy, A Man Called Ove, and then Anxious People is the book that I really want to get to this year. I've heard amazing things about it, and I was planning on reading it last year, but this is one of the books that I really want a physical copy of versus reading it from the library or reading it on my Kindle or something. That's also kind of holding me back from not reading it yet, but either way, I'm going to try to read it this year if I get it or not. Essentially, this book is split into like multiple different POVs, if I'm not mistaken. It is about 8 extremely anxious strangers who are at an apartment open house, and then a bank robber bursts through the door and then keeps those 8 people hostage in this like apartment open house. Next on my list is Parable the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I'm not entirely sure what this book is about. I've just heard very good things about it, and Octavia E. Butler as a whole is an amazing author. But in terms of the description of this book, it is a science fiction dystopia. 2024, with the world descending into madness and anarchy, one woman begins a fateful journey toward a better future. Lauren Alamina and her family live in one of the only safe neighborhoods remaining on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Behind the walls of their defended enclave, Lauren's father, a preacher, and a handful of their citizens try to salvage what remains of a culture that has been destroyed by drugs, disease, war, and chronic water shortages. While her father tries to lead people on the righteous path, Lauren struggles with hyperempathy, a condition that makes her extraordinarily sensitive to the pain of others. When fire destroys her compound, Lauren's family is killed, and she's forced out into a world that is fraught with danger. With a handful of other refugees, Lauren must make her way north to safety, along the way conceiving a revolutionary idea that may mean salvation for all mankind. This book was first published in 1993, and it's about 2024. I'm really excited to read this book. I think it's going to be kind of scary to read the parallels between this book and then what's happening modern day. This is also a book that I really want a physical copy of to be able to read and annotate. A couple more books on my list to go. I feel like I've been talking for so long, which I definitely have been, but a couple more books to go. Next book on my list is A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I added this book onto my list because Katie is reading recently read it, or not recently, maybe like half a year ago, a couple months ago, I have no idea, but she talked about it in a video and she really thoroughly enjoyed it, and the premise of the book sounded very interesting to me. This novel is basically about Dracula's first bride, Constanta. Basically, it's like horror, fantasy, gothic vibes, vampires in it. I don't really read vampire books in general besides like romantasy books, so although this is a fantasy, I feel like it's going to have a different kind of vibe than a romantasy would have with vampires in it, so I'm interested to see like the comparisons of it and how vampires are predicted in this book. Next on my list are 2 Stephen King novels. I still have not read Billy Summers, even though I own a copy of Billy Summers by Stephen King. These are the 2 books that I really wanted to read. The first one being 11/22/63. I heard Haley Pham rave about this book, and I've just overall seen very outstanding reviews for this. It is a book about time travel. I think someone is contracted to go back in time to stop JFK's assassination. There's a subplot of romance in it, which is something that's very intriguing to me. I know the sci-fi historical fiction part of it will probably be really good, but I'm intrigued by the subplot of romance because I love a good romance book. I love contemporary romances and rom-coms, but I think books are so good when the focus is on something else completely immediately, and there's a tiny subplot of romance, and you just get crumbs of it, and you're so excited to get those crumbs. And then the next Stephen King book that I really want to read this year is Misery. This plot just sounds so intriguing to me. It is a horror book, and I typically don't read horror, but essentially this is what the description is. Paul Sheldon. He's a best-selling novelist who has finally met his biggest fan. Her name is Annie Wilkes, and she's more than a rabid reader. She is Paul's nurse, tending his shattered body after an automobile accident, but she's also his captor, keeping him prisoner in her isolated house. Like, that sounds so creepy and spooky, but it sounds very intriguing. Alright, we're finally down to our last two books. They're both classics. I really want to read more classics this year. I did not get to any of the classics that I wanted to read last year, and I genuinely enjoyed reading classics like in high school, but there's just so many books out there that I want to read that the idea of reading a classic doesn't really intrigue me, but I do really want to read them. I want to gain the stories of what, classics have to offer. But the two classics that I really want to get to this year are Persuasion by Jane Austen and The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Those are two very popular classics, and I think it's a good intro classic if I'm not mistaken. I do own quite a few classics. I own The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I do not own Persuasion by Jane Austen, but I do own a few other Jane Austen books, so I might get to those instead of reading Persuasion, but the premise of Persuasion intrigues me more, so that's kind of why it's on this list. Alright, that concludes my list of 25 books that I want to read in 2025. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are a couple rereads that I want to do. I'm just going to rapid fire them because this video is probably very long already. First few books on my list are all of Emily Henry's backlist, specifically Funny Story. I reread Happy Place last year, and when I finished Funny Story when it came out, I immediately knew I wanted to reread it this year. I also really want to reread People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry because the film adaptation is coming out sometime soon, I think. I don't think there's a release date yet, but I'm so excited to watch it, so I really want to reread that book in preparation for whenever the release comes out. Next on my list is I really want to reread Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez and just go through and annotate the paperback copy that I have. I read that book on my Kindle and I did annotate it, but I think it'd be fun to go through my annotations on my Kindle and then transfer it to my paperback. I also really want to reread Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. I love that trilogy so much, and I was planning on rereading it last year, like in December, but I never got to it, so I'm going to try to reread it this year. And then the last book on this list is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I really want to reread this book, but I want to annotate it physically. So my plan is to get a physical copy of it this year and then reread it and annotate it. That wraps up the 25 books I want to read in 2025, plus a few extras for rereads. I'm super excited for this upcoming year of reading. There are so many books on my list that I am so excited to read, so I hope I'm able to get to all of them, and if not, it's probably for some good reason. But let me know down in the comments what's on your 2025 TBR, or your top 5 books that you want to get to in 2025, or any books that you plan to read this year. I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.